Welcome to the Generation Who podcast with your host from GenerationWho.com, Mike. Welcome back for episode 2. This is Mike from GenerationWho.com, and today we are talking about free speech, censorship, the attack of free speech. Is it real? Is it not real? Is it just crap? And then we're going to have a little fun here at the end. Welcome to the Generation Who podcast. This is episode number 2. Let's get it going. Hello and welcome back to the Generation Who podcast. This is episode number 2 and my name is Mike from GenerationWho.com. Today we are talking about an issue that I never thought was an actual issue. I never thought this was really a problem in modern times. However, over the past few months, a number of events have occurred that have definitely changed my mind. So I decided to do a bit of research and here we are. Today we are talking about free speech. We're talking about censorship. We're talking about people trying to shut down free speech. Now again, I always thought that this was more of an attack line coming from the Republicans and the conservatives to try to show that the left is tyrannical. I never thought that this was actually going on. After I give you a few examples of how free speech is being shut down or attempted to be shut down, I'm also going to explain why that's so important, what role that plays in our society, and why this is such a big issue. And then last but not least, we're going to end the episode with a brand new segment that I am extremely jazzed for. I'm really excited for it. Now, if you look throughout history at all of the tyrannical governments, the despotic governments, the ones that have killed the most people, Nazi Germany, Stalinist Russia, Maoist China, etc., they basically have to take away two things before they can control the population fully. Number one, they have to take away your right to bear arms. They have to take away the guns. Hitler did this. We see this all the time in many despotic governments. And they also have to have some form of thought control, right? Sometimes we see that through propaganda. Sometimes we see that through the shutdown of free speech, but essentially what these governments have to do is they have to shut down your mind, they have to shut down your right to defend yourself, they have to disarm your person, and they have to disarm your mind. If they can do that, then the rest of it is cake, the rest of it is easy. Keep this in mind. Now, during the last week in February, a man named Ben Shapiro was supposed to give a speech at CSULA. CSULA is Cal State University, Los Angeles. It's a publicly funded university. And Ben Shapiro is a nationally syndicated radio host. He's a nationally syndicated columnist since he was 17. He's a New York Times bestseller. You can often find him on Fox News, and he runs his own podcast. And he is also the editor-in-chief at dailywire.com. If you've never heard of Ben Shapiro before, go check him out. He's awesome. Full transparency, Ben Shapiro is very conservative, and he is incredibly smart. He went to Harvard Law School. He went to UCLA. Incredibly bright guy. Now, Ben was scheduled to give this speech at CSULA, and a bunch of protesters came out and protested him giving the speech. Now, if they just held up signs, that'd be one thing. If they decided to not show up, that'd be one. That's not an issue. That's completely fine. However, these protesters tried to get the speech shut down. They said that Ben Shapiro spews hate speech and that he's a racist. Now, I've been following Ben Shapiro for a long time, and I've never once heard or read him any of his ideas and thought, oh, that's hate speech or oh, that's racist. Now, Ben Shapiro was scheduled to give a speech at CSULA during the last week in February, and a bunch of protesters came out. And they didn't just hold up signs and protest, they actually blocked off the door so that people could not get in. They had to sneak the audience in the back door, 3 by 3. Mr. Shapiro mentioned 20 uniformed officers just to sneak him into the event. After the event was over, the protesters again blocked the doors, holding the students inside. One student can even be seen on camera talking about how he has a midterm and he's nervous that he'll miss it, but they weren't allowed to leave the building for fear of their safety, their personal safety. Now, before the speech even began, the administration tried to cancel the event. 2 professors took part in this. One professor had a Twitter conversation with a student, and the student was talking about, oh, if we get our hands on Ben Shapiro, we're going to do this to him and that to him, and you just wait, we have a couple ideas. Pretty nasty stuff. Another professor even set up a time and a place and challenged Ben or any of his supporters to a wrestling match, talking about how he will teach them a lesson. He even tweeted out, "I lift, bro." This is all, of course, very, very mature stuff coming from the staff, the faculty over there at CSULA. Congratulations. Once Ben began his speech, they even pulled the fire alarm. And as we all know, pulling a fire alarm when there's no fire, that, again, very, very mature stuff. Great way to take part in debate. Now, the reason the protesters were so upset is because Ben's speech was titled, "When Diversity Becomes an Issue." It wasn't titled "Diversity is an Issue." It wasn't titled "Diversity Sucks." It was "When Diversity Becomes an Issue." Now, if you want to check out Ben's full speech, just go to dailywire.com. It's up there, or you can find it on YouTube. I'm not going to go through his whole speech, but his basic premise was there's 3 types of diversity. There's diversity of ethnicity or skin color, there's diversity of gender, and then there's diversity of viewpoint. The diversity of gender and the diversity of ethnicity or skin color don't matter at all, right? If you're hiring somebody, all you care about is what kind of value they can provide your business. What we should be judging people on is their character. What type of person are they? Are they a good person or a bad person? Not on their color. That was his point on the first 2 types of diversity. His idea on the diversity of viewpoint was that this is the only type of diversity that matters. And ironically, the protesters were trying to shut him down solely because he was a conservative. He brought conservative viewpoints to the table, and they didn't like that. Now, the protesters that were blocking off the door kept chanting, "This is what diversity looks like. This is what diversity looks like." What does diversity look like? What does it look like to you? A blocked door? Mob rule? Tyranny? Is that what it looks like? A bunch of sensitive snowflakes that can't stand to hear an opposing point of view? You see, this is the difference between a civilized society and a barbaric society. In a barbaric society, specifically in the animal kingdom, problems are dealt with through physical brute force. If I want to mate and you want to mate, we fight over it and the winner gets the mate. If I want a piece of food and you want a piece of food, we fight over it and the winner gets the piece of food. That's how barbaric societies and the animal kingdom works. In a civilized society, we are supposed to be able to sit down and have a discussion, even if we disagree, without coming to blows, without punching each other in the jaw. We should be able to talk about these things and not have it escalate to physical violence. Unfortunately, what we saw at CSULA is this isn't the case. A number of reporters were even assaulted outside of the event. If these protesters truly believed that Mr. Shapiro was in the wrong and that their ideas are correct and they're in the right, what they would have done is they would have walked into the speech, waited for the speech to be over, and then during the Q&A portion, challenged him and debated him. Ben always does Q&A. He always engages people, specifically if they disagree with him, and it was known that this Q&A was going to happen and that this was going to happen on video. So if these people really believe that they were in the right and Ben was in the wrong, what they would have done is challenged him to debate during the Q&A session, and they would have embarrassed him. They would have embarrassed him on video at his own event on his website. But they didn't do that. They just tried to shut the thing down. Again, if they were just holding signs or if they decided to not participate in the event, that's fine. You have the right to do that. You have the right to show up and disagree. But to try to shut somebody down just because you disagree with their viewpoint is not conducive to free speech in a free society. Physical threats, violence, that's not okay. That sounds awfully Stalinist to me. If you don't agree with me, physical violence. Now, about a week after Ben's speech, there's a man by the name of Jacob Ellerhorn. And Jacob Ellerhorn is the head of the College Republicans at USC, and he is also a student senator at USC. He was facing impeachment for the sole purpose that he is a conservative. Quite literally, this is what the people opposing Jacob Ellerhorn said, is he's a conservative, we want him out of here. Now, his situation hasn't played out yet, but the fact that these students are trying to take away the voice of any conservative students on campus is not acceptable. Now, both of these examples are the left side of the aisle, the political aisle, the progressives, and the Democrats attacking the right side of the aisle, the Republicans and the conservatives. This is not always the case. We saw this happen with former governor and former mayor of Baltimore, Martin O'Malley, when he was running for president. He was giving a speech and somebody stood up and asked him, "Do Black lives matter?" And Mr. O'Malley responded by saying, "Yes, Black lives matter. Black lives matter, white lives matter, all lives matter." In my eyes, perfectly legitimate response. But not for the Black Lives Matter crew and not for all of the progressive pundits in the media. There was so much backlash at that statement. He had to retract the statement that white lives matter and all lives matter and say, no, just Black lives matter. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't want a president that's only going to look out for one skin type or one skin color. That's absurd. And then during the next Democratic debate, they went down the line and asked each and every candidate, do Black lives matter or do all lives matter? And every single candidate, including Mr. O'Malley, said Black lives matter unequivocally. Again, that's absurd. A president should be caring about all the people, not just one skin type. And if you really have to pander to a group by saying that they're the only ones that matter, then screw that group. Don't worry about them. Just as Trump got in trouble for not denouncing the KKK right off the bat, this is the same idea, right? Trump not denouncing the KKK right off the bat, and David Duke, is the same as these Democratic candidates not denouncing Black Lives Matter when Black Lives Matter gets out of hand and says, no, it's only about black people in America. Screw the white people, fry the pigs like bacon, F the police, we want to see dead cops and we want them now. Sure, the two groups are not equal, right? Black Lives Matter has never hung anybody, and the KKK is despicable, but the underlying principle here is very, very similar. Namely, not denouncing groups who believe one race is superior to the rest out of fear of the repercussions for expressing your opinions. We also saw Condoleezza Rice try to give a commencement speech at Rutgers University, and so many students were protesting and signing petitions saying that Condoleezza Rice is a war criminal, so she shouldn't be allowed on campus, that she actually stepped down and said, I'm not going to give this speech, never mind. Condoleezza Rice is an amazing role model for any American, not to mention the fact that she was the first African-American female Secretary of State. And she has every right to be at Rutgers and give a commencement speech. Furthermore, the students at Rutgers, I hope that if President Obama were to come and give a commencement speech, they would petition him because President Obama has increased drone strikes to the likes that we have never ever seen before. Since President Obama has been in the White House, there have been over 300 drone strikes, which outnumbers the Bush administration 5-1. So again, Rutgers, I hope that you would also protest and call President Obama a war criminal, even though he's a Democrat and Condoleezza Rice is a Republican. Otherwise, you're not being logically consistent, you're not being philosophically consistent, and you're being an idiot. After all, those drone strikes have resulted in more than 2,400 dead people. So by your own logic, President Obama is a war criminal if Condoleezza Rice is a war criminal. And she wasn't even the one making the calls. Now, I've had my own experiences with people trying to shut down my ideas on the college campus. As you well know, I'm a student at the University of California, Berkeley, which is a very, very liberal institution. So I like to go in there and kind of shake things up a bit. I could entertain you with stories all day of me going back and forth with students and professors. Unfortunately, due to time, we're going to have to either save that for another time or I'll write an article about it. So stay tuned to GenerationWho.com for updates. Now, it's important to be curious about why free speech is an issue or why censorship is an issue. In somebody like Mr. Shapiro's case, he's a California state taxpayer, which funds CSULA, so he has every right to be there and give his speech. The administration tried to shut him down. Ben said he would show up anyway. He was even prepared to be arrested or hold the event in a hallway. Luckily for Ben and his game of chicken with the administration, Ben won. The administration said, okay, we'll let it go on. If you want to see a modern example of a state that does not allow free speech, that is strong on censorship, take a look at North Korea. North Korea is a black hole. North Korea endorses slave labor. North Korea recently threatened South Korea and said that if South Korea does not publicly admit to treason and decapitate its top leaders, they were going to bomb Seoul, South Korea. So again, a totalitarian state taking away free speech, not uncommon. Now, obviously, us here in America are not anywhere near that point. Unfortunately, we are seeing some censorship starting to take place, beginning to take place, and we need to nip this in the bud. Traditionally, we see Stalinist Russia as a strong case for what happens when a state decides to censor people's free speech and censor their thoughts. If you ever want to check out a great book to see what it was like to live in a regime like that, check out a book called Under a Cruel Star by Hayda Kovaly, Kovaly. Her husband was Rudolf Margolius, who was actually executed in Stalin's show trials. The show trials were basically anybody who Stalin thought was against him or was plotting against him, he would basically trump them up on fake charges and then either kill them or just have them jailed. And that is what Hayda Kovaly's husband was going through and was caught up in, is the Stalin show trials. Hitler had his SS and his Gestapo, and they were running around as well, making sure that the Nazi propaganda was running at full steam. And of course, if you speak out against the Reich, you're in big trouble. Again, I don't think America is anywhere near North Korea or Stalinist Russia or Nazi Germany, but the idea here is to give you an example of what occurs when free speech is taken away. Now, the irony in the situation with Mr. Shapiro is that Dinesh D'Souza and Bill Ayers gave a few talks recently, one at Dartmouth and one at the University of Michigan. Now, Dinesh D'Souza is very conservative and Bill Ayers is very liberal on most issues. Bill Ayers is a domestic terrorist. He tried to blow up the Pentagon. He had plans to blow up other locations in America. He actually tried to kill people. And nobody is protesting Bill Ayers' right to speak at a college. Nobody is protesting his right to be able to debate Dinesh D'Souza, even though he is a domestic terrorist, and a well-known domestic terrorist. Yet Ben Shapiro, who doesn't have a criminal record, who's never said anything that is racist or hate speech, and people are standing up trying to prevent this guy from talking. There just seems to be such a double standard here. Again, this brings me to the President Obama versus Condoleezza Rice issue. There seems to be a very, very, very heavy double standard here. Now, before we go any further, there is a difference between a typical middle-of-the-road Democrat and then a progressive leftist. The progressive leftist is dangerous to this nation. The middle-of-the-road Democrat, your mom's Democrat, your father's Democrat, not an issue. That's fine. Progressive leftists, on the other hand, these are a threat to our liberties, literally. This is where all of the attacks on free speech are coming from, the far, far left. And they will attack moderate Democrats, they will attack Republicans, they will attack far-right people. Doesn't matter at all. These attacks on free speech are coming from the progressive left. Now, tied to the progressive left trying to shut down free speech is the political correctness issue. Now, most Americans believe that political correctness is absurd. This is why Trump has such a big following, or one of the reasons Trump has such a big following, and this following is very visceral, is because he is anti-politically correct. He's not just not politically correct, he's anti-politically correct. Political correctness is literally cultural Marxism, literally. It's totalitarian in nature. It defines which groups are good and which groups are bad, right? It says that if you are a victim, you're good. If you're a minority, you're good. And if you are a non-minority or if you're a non-victim, then you're inherently bad or you're guilty until proven innocent. This is similar to how Marx in the Communist Manifesto and a little bit in Capital as well talked about how the proletariat is naturally good and the bourgeois are naturally evil. This is very similar. This goes all the way back to the 1920s and the Frankfurt School, which was a Marxist school, but they knew that if they called it a Marxist school, Americans wouldn't be so happy, but they just called it the Frankfurt School, and they had a bunch of Marxists there, and they tried to forward Marxism and communism and socialism in America. One of the theories that came out of the Frankfurt School is called critical theory, and critical theory really is kind of the theory of victimization. This is where political correctness comes from, is critical theory. We're going to do a whole other episode on political correctness and really, really dig deep into it, but political correctness is so closely tied to censorship and free speech, we can't ignore it. Now, what does the Constitution say about free speech? Well, it says you have free speech in the public square. This is why I find it funny when people are talking about the Second Amendment, about gun rights, and they'll say, well, you can only have a musket. Everyone can have a musket, but the founders never foresaw AR-15s and machine guns and all that. Well, by that same logic, you're telling me that we only have free speech based on what we can scream from a street corner, meaning that we can't use TV as a medium of free speech because the founders could have never foresaw TV. We can't use the internet as free speech because the founders didn't have internet and they could have never conceived of the internet themselves. So that's essentially a terrible argument for the Second Amendment, but you're allowed to speak your voice as much as you want, even if people don't agree with it. This is the issue that we see a lot in the pop culture today, is that if a celebrity or a businessman says something that the progressive left does not agree with, they try to get that person fired. We just saw this with the CEO of Indian Wells, who said that women tennis players should thank Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal for keeping interest in the sport, and he was asked to step down. We saw this with the owner of Chick-fil-A when he said that he was anti-gay marriage. A bunch of people from the progressive left came and protested and tried to shut down Chick-fil-A. And whether you agree or disagree with the stances of these men, all they did was speak their mind. One or two sentences, and now all of a sudden the progressive left is trying to shut them down completely. Now, when I'm thinking about an issue regarding free speech, I think of a few things. Number one, I think, let's all be adults here. Debate, fine. Discussion, fine. Walking away, ignoring, fine. But physical violence, whether you're threatening Ben Shapiro to a wrestling match or assaulting the reporters outside, physical violence has no place in political debate. Again, civilized versus barbaric societies. This is the main difference. In a civilized society, you don't have to watch your back that you're going to be stabbed or hit in the back of the head with a club every 2 seconds. In a barbaric society, it's very stressful. You do have to worry about being physically assaulted all the time. Number two, don't slander opposing viewpoints just to get them to shut up. One example of this is if you're talking to somebody about race relations in America. And because you disagree with them, even if you have facts to back it up, they say, oh, you're a racist. They don't actually think you're a racist, number one. They're just trying to shut you up. They just want to shut you down. And number two, the accusation of racism only works on somebody to shut them up if they are not a racist. What do I mean by that? Well, if you walked up to a guy in the KKK and you said, pardon me, sir, looks like you're a bit of a racist. Looks like you don't treat black people very well. He would respond by saying, yeah, do you see the hood? Do you see the cross in the background? Of course I'm a racist. That's why I'm in the KKK. If you walked up to Hitler and you said, pardon me, sir, looks like you don't care for Jews too much. You, sir, are a racist. He'd probably say, yeah, did you miss the 12 million dead? 6 million of those are Jews. Of course I'm racist. The charge of racism only works to shut people up if they are not racist because they don't want to be branded racist. That's one of the worst things you could be branded in modern America. But calling somebody a racist or a sexist or a bigot or a homophobe is only there to try to shut them up and shut them down. We saw Hillary Clinton say that Republicans are just like ISIS and just like terrorist groups just because they disagree with her on foreign policy. That's absurd. Okay, you might not like Trump, but he's definitely not ISIS. You might not like Ted Cruz, but he's definitely not an ISIS member. You might not like John Kasich, but he is definitely not an ISIS member. The third thing I try to remind myself of is sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I don't know what happened to this phrase. I used to love this phrase. Why is that so hard for people to understand? If Ben Shapiro wants to go and give a speech about when he thinks diversity is an issue, even if you disagree with it, and even if you have nothing to say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I thought all children were taught that, but I guess not the children at CSULA, not quite yet. Somebody ought to go teach them. Fourth comes from a man named Bill Whittle, and if you've never heard of Bill Whittle before, please check out Bill Whittle. BillWhittle.com, it's WHITTLE, or check him out on YouTube. This man is amazing. The first time I ever heard this was Bill Whittle. He said, you do not have the right to not be offended in this country. I love that saying. I had never heard that before. And it makes so much sense because if we had a tyrannical, despotic leader, and his name was, John Doe, and we were running around saying, I love John Doe. John Doe is the best president ever, then there'd be no reason to censor our speech. What we have to protect with the First Amendment is offensive speech. It's the speech that may hurt somebody's feelings. It's the speech that says John Doe is a terrible dictator and we need to get rid of him right now. That's the speech that we actually need to protect. It's the opposition. It's the offensive speech that needs to be protected. And last but not least, your right to swing your fist ends at my nose. That means you can swing your fist as much as you'd like, but the second it touches my nose, you have now infringed upon my right to not be punched in the face, and I'm going to whoop your butt and you're going to go to jail. Which means you can ask me for change if I'm walking on the sidewalk. You can ask me for change, but if I don't respond to you, you don't have a right to grab my arm and stop me. You have a right to free speech, and I have a right to not listen. I have a right to not pay attention, or I have a right to retort. Now that we have seen how free speech is under attack in America at the moment, and kind of to what level it's under attack, I'd like to issue a challenge to all of my fellow college students out there that are listening to this right now. Be skeptical. I challenge you to be skeptical. I'm not saying you have to be conservative. I'm not saying you have to be this or that. Be skeptical of whatever your professors are telling you. I feel like skepticism is dying on the college campus. Every class I'm in, all I see is nodding heads from the students. Yep, interesting. But nobody challenges these professors. I believe that questioning things leads you to the truth. Even if I question and the professor has good answers for it, okay, now I can trust what he's saying. If not, if he can't supply me with enough evidence to back up his argument, then I'm going to go home and look it up for myself. Be skeptical, question things, challenge people. Because oftentimes, specifically with a lot of these kind of catchphrases of white privilege or the 1%, people know the catchphrase, but they can't back it up if you press them on it. A good example of this is institutional racism. Okay, which institution is racist and how? Because if I see a racist, I dislike him just as much as you. Just giving me a catchphrase doesn't prove anything. So be skeptical, challenge, question. And if you are well informed and you do disagree, don't be afraid to walk toward the fire. Now, I'd like to end the episode with something that I've been looking forward to. In my circle of friends and coworkers and family, I'm kind of known for ranting about issues. And most people love to hear my rants. They think they're entertaining. I get all worked up and whatnot. So we're going to try to end this episode, since we have a few minutes left, with a rant. Now, these are not issues that I research or look up or think about too long. It's just something that kind of bugs me and then I go off on them. But they're fun. So recently, a rapper/R&B singer named Chris Brown came out against Trump. Now, I'm a huge hip-hop fan, and I'm not a huge Trump fan, but I'm also not a huge Trump hater. I'm not for him. I'm not really against him. I'm constantly kind of going back and forth on what I think about him. What I can tell you is I do not think that Trump is a racist. I do not think that he's evil. I don't think he's Hitler. And basically, Chris Brown came out and he said, F Trump, Trump's evil, and black people should go to his rallies with like 50 people and just disrupt the whole thing. This is coming from Chris Brown, who got arrested for beating up Rihanna. He got arrested for beating up a woman. So punching a protester in the face may not be okay, but beating up a woman is far worse, in my opinion. Chris Brown also talks about how he's blood affiliated and Pyru affiliated, how he's a member of a gang. And then you're going to criticize Trump, who's standing up there and speaking to people? He's not affiliated with any gangs, and you're trashing him for this? Chris Brown has had a number of legal troubles with drugs, with hitting women, with cars, and he says that justice should be served and that this is racist. Well, the guy was charged and arrested that hit the protester at the Trump rally. He was charged and arrested. Is that not justice? Right? You punch somebody, you get arrested and charged. That seems to be justice to me, unless you're talking about street justice. Is that what you're talking about, Chris? Because I know you're a fan of that since you're a blood-affiliated woman beater. I am a big fan of his music, though. I like his music. Now, while we're on the whole Trump train, a lot of people are accusing Trump of being like Hitler. If you think that Trump is anywhere near Hitler, you are offending the 12 million dead ashes that are buried in Eastern Europe. Hitler was evil. Hitler was mentally ill, right? He wrote Mein Kampf while he was in a 5150 prison cell. And if you've ever tried to read the thing, it's almost incomprehensible. It's just kind of this random rant. There's no real plot to it. Hitler was not mentally stable. He tried to take power during the beer hall putsch of 1933 and was arrested for it. It's also strongly suspected that Hitler had syphilis. And when syphilis goes untreated, it enters your brain and it causes a lot of mental instabilities. To compare Hitler and Trump is to downplay history, is to downplay fact. And on this topic, would I rather have Trump as president or Obama as president? President Obama was the editor-in-chief of the Harvard Law Review, the president of the Harvard Law Review, and he never wrote one single law review. And then he went out and passed out a few papers in Chicago. Boom, he's in the Senate. Boom, he's president. With Trump, at least he built a company that's worth $10 billion. At least he's done something. Now, sure, did he get $1 million loan, right, from his father? Sure, but it's not easy to turn $1 million into $10 billion. And even if it were easy, President Obama never did a quarter of that. He just kind of walked in these magically open doors for him and ended up in the presidency. And look how that's gone for us. Race relations are at a 20-year low. The world's in a mess. He creates this thing called ISIS. Then he calls them the JV team. A few days later, another ISIS attack. And then we have Angelina Jolie saying, oh, America should take in more refugees. A few days later, refugees attack in Brussels. It's just absurd to me. None of this makes any common sense in my eyes. I can't understand these people. I can't understand these progressive leftists. And then we have Mitt Romney running around denouncing Trump, saying he's a terrible candidate. Romney, you couldn't even beat Obama. You fell asleep and couldn't even beat President Obama after 4 years of a terrible presidency. Yet here we are with Mitt Romney running around saying Trump is a terrible businessman. But when Trump was backing Romney, Romney seemed to be fine with him. I honestly think that Mitt Romney is just too engaged in the political establishment, the establishment Republicans, and if we can say one definitive thing about this election, it is the year of the outsider. Whether it's Bernie Sanders, the 30-year congressman outsider, whether it's Hillary Clinton, who claims she's an outsider just because her genitalia are a bit different, even though she's a Clinton and part of the Clinton political machine, or whether it's Trump, who is truly an outsider, or Cruz, who is truly an outsider. This is a year of the outsider, so the more Romney comes out against Trump, the more steam Trump will get. Somebody sees a failed candidate from 2012 who is part of the establishment coming out against the frontrunner who is anti-establishment, and you think people are like, oh, that establishment candidate, Mitt Romney, said not to vote for Trump, so in that case, I guess I'll change my mind and vote for John Kasich. No, that doesn't happen. That does not happen. And there's the music, folks. Hopefully this was interesting. Thank you for joining us here at Generation Who. We'll have another podcast up here soon. My name is Mike. I'm out.